A sealed letter. A locked room. 7 African generals dressed in ribbons and regret waited in silence. They called it a summit for peace, but it smelled like betrayal. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped into that velvet-trimmed hall in Dar es Salaam, he wasn't just walking into a meeting. He was stepping into history, the kind written not with ink, but with defiance. The curtains hung heavy, the air stale with foreign cologne and foreign promises. 7 men rose to greet him, but their hands were cold. They didn't want discussion, they wanted obedience. He was too young, too bold, too awake for a system built on silence. They handed him a folder. 30 days to resign, they said. In return, peace investments, no sanctions. In reality, a leash disguised as diplomacy. But Traoré didn't blink. You didn't invite me to a summit, he said. You invited me to my own funeral. And then he smiled. What followed was not a speech, it was an indictment, not a rebellion, a reckoning. Because Africa, he said, is not dying, she is in labor, and no army on earth can silence a continent that remembers who she is. No orders were shouted, no bullets were fired, yet the weight in the room was heavier than a death sentence. General Adabi of Nigeria was the first to speak. He slid a leather folder across the polished table toward Traoré. No prelude, no diplomacy. Inside an ultimatum. Announce your resignation within 30 days, it read. In return, a peaceful transition. No sanctions, no unrest. Just silence bought with foreign money and dressed in tailored suits. They spoke of stability, Traoré would later recall, but it was the kind found in prisons, not in justice. Their language was corporate, not military investor confidence. Regional image, responsible leadership. But every line was inked in Zurich, not Ouagadougou. General Ouattara of Côte d'Ivoire murmured, without meeting his eyes, "You've become inconvenient." Traoré didn't answer. He didn't need to. He scanned their faces. Men once called heroes, now brokers in uniforms. They no longer carried rifles, only requests. Not for peace, but for permission. He stood. Not abruptly, not shaking. Each word he spoke fell like flint to dry grass. You did not summon me for dialogue, he said. You summoned me to bury a defiance you could no longer control. Some eyes narrowed, others looked away. You say I am destabilizing the region, he continued. No, gentleman. It is truth that destabilizes lies. It is dignity that shakes dependency. His voice remained steady, but none dared interrupt. Africa is not poor. She is being looted, every hour, in daylight, with our signatures at the bottom of the theft. Then he read names not from rumor, but from files precise damning. Oil companies in Chad, but no roads. Lithium mines in Mali, while schools collapse. Uranium shipped from Niger to power Europe, while Niger itself lives in the dark. Gold exported from Burkina Faso to Dubai, while our people drink from rusted wells. Do not call it aid when they take 10 and return 1, he declared. Do not call it partnership when they hold the leash and we wear the uniform. One general shifted uncomfortably. Another tapped his fingers to hide the tremor. They do not fear our guns, Traoré said. They fear something far more dangerous, our awakening. Because the moment an African child learns she was never born, broken, the empire begins to crack. He paused. No one breathed. If I am to be removed for saying this, he continued, then let it be done in daylight. But I will not die with their gold in my mouth. It wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. Delivered not with outrage, but with the composure of a man who had already buried his fear. When excuses ran dry, when no more masks were left to hide behind, Traoré did what no one in that room expected. He presented a plan, not a petition, not a protest, a blueprint etched with intent, built in silence. From beneath his coat, he pulled out a cloth-bound folder, no national anthem on the cover, no donor logos, just the seal of the transitional government of Burkina Faso. He placed it on the table like a surgeon revealing a diagnosis. and spoke not in passion, but precision. "You summoned me to resign," he said. "I came to declare something far deeper sovereignty." He opened the first page. "We are no longer shipping gold to Paris, no longer storing our reserves in Zurich. We are building our own gold reserve system, logged, audited, and fully public." One general frowned, another leaned closer. This was not rhetoric, it was infrastructure. He turned the next page. "We are launching an African research alliance from Accra to Addis Ababa. Our scientists will not be rented, they will be trained. We will not beg for patents, we will create them. No flag waving, no applause lines. Just pages of policy drafted by those who'd stopped asking permission. We are forming a youth corps, not to fight foreign wars, but to build roads, dig wells and restore clinics. Our youth will not be armed to police their brothers. They will be empowered to heal what colonialism left in ruin." Some generals glanced away. Others fixed their eyes on the pages, as if reading a forbidden scripture. Traoré lowered his voice, drawing them closer without a single step. "They say we are landlocked," he whispered. "But we are people-linked. We are not a colony, not a quarry, not a battlefield for rent." He paused. "We are a nation. And we will act like one. Question to the audience. If you were a leader of a small resource-rich nation like Burkina Faso, would you follow the rules to keep investors happy, or risk everything to build something your people truly own?" None of the men around that table answered. Not because they lacked opinions, but because they realized something devastating. They were no longer at the center of the future. While they negotiated for favor, he had already begun building freedom. While they preserved a system, he had launched a blueprint to outgrow it. And suddenly their uniforms felt heavier. Not with medals, but with irrelevance. They thought it would be a quiet submission, a signature, a handshake, then silence. But truth has a sound of its own. Hidden in a faux potted plant in the corner of the hall, a tiny red light blinked. One of Traoré's aides had been streaming the meeting, secretly, silently. The generals had allowed cameras they assumed it would capture his capitulation. Instead, it captured his defiance. By nightfall, the footage hit WhatsApp, a shaky hand, a grainy video. But the words were clear. "Africa is not dying, she is in labor." It spread like wildfire on dry Harmattan winds. From TikTok cuts over Sankara's music, to Twitter threads dissecting every sentence, to classroom projectors in Nairobi and street rallies in Kinshasa. In Bamako, students painted on university walls, "We are not poor, we are pillaged." In Ouagadougou, thousands poured into the square before dawn, chanting his name not as a leader but as a mirror of themselves. In Ghana, young men raised gold-painted shovels, not guns, into the air. Symbols, not weapons. Inside high-level military halls, where power once moved through hushed corridors, panic now echoed louder than any marching boots. Phones buzzed, emergency meetings called. Embassies issued warnings: avoid large gatherings, remain indoors. We advise caution in West Africa. But no warning could hold back memory. By mid-afternoon, the U.S. State Department released a carefully worded statement about respecting democratic transitions. France said less. Its officials met behind locked doors, and then came Harvard. The university, once proud to host Traoré at their Global Governance Forum, released a clipped update. Due to scheduling conflicts, President Traoré will no longer be attending. But it was too late. The fire had spread beyond the gates of academia, into the bloodstream of a continent long taught to forget. In lecture halls across Africa, students rose to their feet as the video played. One Ghanaian student stood and declared, "We are no longer case studies. We are revolutions in progress." Applause erupted, not in protest, but in recognition. Then came the resignations. Dr. Elias Mensah, a tenured professor of African political economy, submitted his letter. If truth is divisive, then Harvard has chosen comfort over courage. 3 others followed. One left a note taped to his unlocked door. Lumumba was killed for less. Outside, African students set up tents in silent protest. No chants, just signs. Curriculum colonization. Invite the people, not the puppets. Inside their silence, a continent remembered itself. Harvard tried to ignore it. But ignoring a wound does not heal it. Posters of the dean's face appeared around campus beneath a single Traoré quote. You can only delay them. No one needed the rest. Everyone knew how it ended. The generals reconvened. This time in Abidjan, under urgent protocol, desperate to salvage control before the cracks became a collapse. The plan was simple: issue sanctions on Burkina Faso, freeze development aid, block regional trade routes, paint Traoré as reckless, frame his defiance as danger. On paper it should have worked. They'd done it before against Gaddafi, Sankara, even Lumumba. Strip away legitimacy, starve the resistance, crush the spirit. But they forgot one thing. This time the people were watching, and this time they remembered. The first break came quietly. Guinea's delegate, acting on direct instruction from Conakry's Youth Council, stood and refused to sign. We will not sanction a man for telling the truth, he said. Gasps filled the hall. Murmurs rippled. Then Mali followed. Minutes later, Niger's representative hesitated, then folded the paper back into his briefcase without a word. The illusion of unity shattered, not with explosions, but with memory. Papers shuffled. Phones buzzed. Whispers flew like mosquitoes trapped in heat. The once solid block now cracked into fragments, and while they argued, Ouagadougou roared. Traoré had returned, not in convoy, not under protection, on foot. The crowd stretched for miles. Children on shoulders, elders waving flags, women singing freedom songs they hadn't touched in decades. Red dust danced in the air like incense rising from a sacred altar. He didn't speak from a podium. He walked among them. They touched his arm. They wept. Some simply whispered, "You didn't lie." No orders shouted, no guns fired. And yet across the continent something shifted. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't revolution. It was remembrance. In Kinshasa, murals appeared overnight. The empire ends when we remember. In Dakar Market, women renamed their stalls New Africa Produce, No Chains. In Nairobi, schoolchildren rewrote their mourning pledges, replacing imported slogans with Traoré's words. In Accra, university halls filled with debates not about policies, but about what dignity looks like in African terms. What started as a leak had become a liturgy. Back in Abidjan, panic metastasized into pettiness. Emails flew between embassies and think tanks. How did this happen? Who approved the recording? Can the footage be scrubbed? But you can't unring a bell. You can't silence a story already sung in 10 tongues. Then came the message from the streets, a homemade sign held by a teenage boy in Bamako. You punished our past. We are now protecting our future. It went viral. The phrase made it to protest banners in Johannesburg, to tweets in Swahili, to graffiti in Lagos, protecting our future. The story was no longer about one man. It was about 1 million hearts waking at once. At the United Nations, delegates scrambled for statements. One Western ambassador sighed. We underestimated him. Another whispered, it's not him, it's the continent. And they were right. What Traoré had done was never about one policy or one speech. It was about daring to speak a sentence that so many had swallowed for generations. We were never the problem. The silence was. He had spoken not as a soldier, but as a son of the soil. And in doing so, he had undone decades of manufactured doubt. In a village in northern Togo, an elder who had never owned a radio asked his grandson to read him the speech. The boy pulled up a translation on his cracked phone. As he read, the elder closed his eyes and whispered, "He speaks like the land, firm, not loud." By the end of the week, ECOWAS was fractured. Half the bloc demanded punishment. The other half refused to move. In Nigeria, students stormed an international summit demanding, "Where is your shame? Why do you fear the voice of your brother?" In Côte d'Ivoire, leaked cables revealed quiet rifts in the military, young officers questioning the chain of command. In Senegal, local artists remixed Traoré's speech into a viral anthem, "Africa is in labor," blasting from taxi stalls and nightclubs. And in Washington, D.C., a State Department memo leaked to press, "The Burkina Faso situation is no longer containable. We must reassess our posture in the region." Traoré had not raised an army, he had raised awareness, and that they realized was far more dangerous. By the time Harvard tried to rewrite the narrative had already become wildfire. A quote once censored was now stenciled across walls from Cape Town to Casablanca. Africa is not dying. She is in labor. It no longer belonged to Traoré. It belonged to the people. On a rooftop in Nairobi, students held vigils. No speeches, just candles and silence. In Addis Ababa, elders recited lines from the speech, beside portraits of Sankara and Lumumba. In Lagos, a rapper dropped a track titled, "We Are Not Poor," sampling Traoré's voice cut with footage from colonial archives. In Johannesburg High School, teachers rewrote syllabi overnight. History wasn't changing, it was finally being told. At the African Union headquarters, an emergency session was called to address the growing unrest. But when a delegate from Sudan stood and quoted Traoré, "They don't fear our guns, they fear our awareness," half the room erupted in applause. The other half shifted nervously. A journalist whispered, "This isn't politics anymore. It's resurrection." And then came the unthinkable. In Paris, protesters, many second-generation African immigrants, marched down the Champs-Élysées. They held signs not asking for jobs or justice in France, but declaring allegiance to New Africa. In Brussels, a Congolese student stood outside the EU Parliament and shouted, "You mined our land. Now, we mine our memory." The footage made headlines, but more importantly, it made echoes. At Traoré's next public appearance, he said nothing. He walked into the square in Ouagadougou, wearing plain clothes, no military ribbons. The crowd didn't chant his name, they chanted each other's. "We are the resistance. We are the recall. We are the reason Africa wakes." He stood among them not as a president, but as a placeholder, for every ancestor betrayed and every child still waiting. That night, the stars over the Sahel seemed brighter. A poet in Kigali wrote, "We thought we needed a hero. Turns out we needed a memory." And somewhere in a quiet office in Geneva, a consultant stared at a failing economic forecast and murmured, "We didn't lose to an army, we lost to a sentence." What began as a sealed letter hidden in the folds of protocol and fear, ended not in silence but in fire. Not fire that burns, but fire that illuminates. Traoré did not dismantle an empire. He reminded us it was always made of smoke. He did not raise an army, he raised a mirror. And millions of Africans from dusty villages to towering universities finally looked in and saw themselves. Not as recipients, not as survivors, but as authors. This is not a story of victory. This is the birth of clarity. It is no longer about Ibrahim Traoré. It is about a generation choosing dignity over dependency. A continent once labeled broken now dares to ask, who broke us? And more importantly, why did we ever stop repairing ourselves? This is a reckoning not just with colonizers, but with the silence we've carried. It is not revenge. It is return to soil, to spirit, to story. And if you feel it in your chest, in your spine, in your bloodline, you are not alone. This is your call. If you believe in a new Africa, one born not from borrowed dreams, but from remembered truths, type it below New Africa. If you are watching this from the continent, drop your country in the comments. Let the world see where the memory rises. And if this story moved, you don't let it stay between us. Share this video. Subscribe not just to the channel, but to the dream, the one they tried to erase. We are not watching Africa collapse. We are witnessing her remember. And no treaty, no threat, no tank can stop a continent that has come home to itself. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not simply one of personal bravery or political confrontation. It is a blueprint for what sovereignty truly means in the post-colonial African context. At the heart of this account lies a powerful lesson that sovereignty is not granted, it is asserted, defended, and ultimately remembered. When Traoré walked into that summit in Dar es Salaam, it wasn't just a physical entrance. It was a symbolic disruption, a challenge to decades of backdoor diplomacy, foreign manipulation, and silent complicity. The first lesson, then, is that true leadership does not wait for permission to act. Traoré did not seek approval from the old order. He brought his own agenda, his own blueprint, and most importantly, his own definition of dignity. The second lesson is about truth and discomfort. Traoré's speech, now viral across continents, exposed the sanitized language of regional politics. Words like stability, development aid, and investor confidence were unmasked as tools of containment, not liberation. He reminded us that Africa is not poor, she is being pillaged in broad daylight. This revelation shattered the illusion that decorum is more important than justice. Sometimes truth must be confrontational, especially when silence becomes complicity. Another vital takeaway is the power of symbolism. Traoré did not raise an army, he raised a mirror. In doing so, he allowed millions of Africans from Nairobi to Accra to see their struggles, their questions, and their suppressed pride reflected back with clarity. One man's defiance became a continent's awakening. This reminds us that symbols often move people faster than policies. Words like "Africa is not dying, she is in labor" carried more revolutionary weight than any speech from a diplomat. Then comes the lesson of memory as resistance. Colonialism's greatest achievement was not the theft of gold or land, but the theft of memory. The idea that Africa must look outward for solutions, legitimacy, or leadership. Traoré reversed that paradigm. He dared to act not as a manager of Western expectations, but as a custodian of African dignity. And in doing so, he reactivated generational memory of Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah, not as martyrs of a failed era, but as unfulfilled promises now ripe for revival. The silent protests at Harvard, the murals in Kinshasa, the shovels raised instead of guns in Ghana, all illustrate a deeper transformation. This is not about one man. It is about the reclamation of authorship. Africa is tired of being a case study. It is ready to write its own syllabus design, its own currency, and define its own future. Another lesson is the danger of irrelevance for elites. The generals at the summit wore uniforms heavy with medals, but Traoré's words revealed those medals to be symbols of submission, not sacrifice. In contrast, his lack of pretense, no flags, no anthems, no donor logos, gave his presence more gravity than 1,000 press releases. It shows that authenticity now has more currency than protocol. The global reaction from panic in Paris to unease in Washington proves the final and perhaps most important lesson. Awareness is more dangerous than arms. No army invaded. No coup was staged. Yet the world's most powerful institutions scrambled to contain a message. A sentence simple, clear, and defiant traveled faster than any drone, struck deeper than any bullet, and reached corners that even aid could not penetrate. In today's Africa, the war is not merely for land or resources, it is for narrative. And in that war, the pen, the voice, the vision, these are the new weapons. What Traoré did was shift the battleground from summits and sanctions to street murals and syllabi. He didn't need to overthrow governments. He overthrew the idea that Africa must always negotiate from a position of shame. If you are an African policymaker, student, educator, or activist, the lesson is this. Stop asking for inclusion in broken systems. Build new ones, draft blueprints, raise awareness. Trade applause for clarity and popularity for principle. Let your legitimacy rise not from Western headlines, but from the whispered "you didn't lie" of your own people. In conclusion, this story is not one of rebellion, but remembrance. It is not merely the tale of one president standing up, it is a generation rising to its feet. Ibrahim Traoré reminded the world that Africa does not need saving, she needs remembering. And the moment we remember that we are no longer problems to be solved, but authors of the world's most unfinished, most powerful story, let this be our commitment to resist, not just exploitation, but erasure, to challenge not just occupation, but obedience, to build not just infrastructure, but institutions of thought, memory, and pride. For in the words of the elder in Togo, he speaks like the land, firm, not loud. And perhaps that is the loudest lesson of all. I was born on African soil, the kind that stains your fingers red, the kind that carries both hunger and memory. Like many Africans, I was taught early to bow my head in the presence of authority, to thank those who gave us aid, and to recite names of foreign cities as if they were our own capitals. Paris, London, Washington. They were not just places, they were mirrors we were told to measure ourselves against. But something changed when I watched that video of Captain Ibrahim Traoré standing before 7 generals and refusing to kneel. That was not just a speech, it was a return. We, the children of this continent, have lived too long in the pause between two lies, the lie that we are broken and the lie that we must beg to be fixed. But Traoré, standing there with no apologies and no fear, cracked that silence open, and for the first time in a long time we heard ourselves. When he said Africa is not dying, she is in labor, it wasn't poetry. It was a memory we had buried under years of borrowed slogans and diplomatic scripts. I watched as the internet lit up, students in Nairobi quoting him, market women in Dakar singing his words, street artists in Kinshasa painting his face next to Sankara's. Something deep had shifted. This is what it means to be African today. We are not waiting for development conferences. We are remembering. For too long we were made to believe that power comes from guns, from passports with gold seals, from invitations to international summits. But Traoré showed us something else, that power can come from clarity, from telling the truth, in a room full of men who profit from lies. His truth became ours. When he read aloud the names of companies looting our resources, I felt my stomach turn. Not in shock, but in recognition. Because I know that village in Niger without electricity. I've seen the rusted wells of Burkina Faso. I've watched children in Mali walk barefoot past trucks carrying lithium bound for Europe. These are not statistics. These are our lives. Traoré did not just expose them, he exposed us too. Our leaders who sign contracts in air-conditioned rooms while our schools crumble. Our silence which we mistook for peace. Our shame inherited from colonizers who called our ancestors savages and called our suffering development challenges. But now the shame is not ours to carry anymore. From my perspective as an African, this was not just about policy, it was about dignity. Traoré didn't promise us miracles. He didn't speak like a savior. He spoke like a son. And in that, he gave us back something that had been missing for decades, a voice that didn't echo someone else's language. We've been told to choose between stability and sovereignty, between investment and independence. But why must these be opposites? Why must we always shrink to make room for someone else's comfort? The lesson I take from this moment, and I know millions across the continent feel it too, is that we are no longer asking, we are declaring. This isn't arrogance, it's awareness. It is the awareness that we have scientists, not just singers, that we have engineers, not just entertainers, that our youth can dig wells, design currencies, and defend our dignity, not just die in someone else's war. When Traoré unveiled his plan for youth brigades to build instead of fight, I thought of my younger brother, a smart boy who was almost recruited into a militia because he had no other option. What if his hands could build roads instead? What if his mind could dream beyond survival? As Africans, we are no longer interested in being praised for resilience. We are demanding restoration. We are not just surviving systems. We are designing futures, This is not about hatred of the West. Let them keep their systems. Let us build ours. Because here's the truth, no one will free us but ourselves. Not the UN, not France, not the IMF. They may support us, they may oppose us, but the work is ours. I saw it in the streets of Ouagadougou, in the eyes of women chanting, "You didn't lie," in the children who painted New Africa on their school walls. We're no longer ashamed to dream in our own names. Yes, there will be backlash, sanctions, media spin. They will call us unstable, radical, dangerous. But I ask you, dangerous to whom? Not to the farmer in Bobo Dioulasso who wants water for his crops. Not to the girl in Kisumu who wants science in her language. Not to the elder in Togo who says, Traoré speaks like the land. No. We are dangerous only to those who profit from our forgetting. So what now? Now we remember. We organize. We protect each other's stories like seeds. In every WhatsApp group, in every barbershop, every marketplace and dorm room we speak. We share. We question. Not just our enemies, but our own leaders. Because if this moment teaches us anything, it is that Africans must hold each other accountable, not just outsiders. The power that rose in Burkina Faso is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be replicated. We must become the kind of people who no longer clap for survival, but demand justice. Who teach our children not just history, but the courage to rewrite it. Who vote with vision, who protest with purpose, who govern with humility. This is not just a political shift, it is spiritual. Because when Traoré stood his ground, he stood on behalf of generations, not just behind, but ahead. And we too must become that kind of ancestor, the kind who makes the road by walking it, who refuses to hand down silence, who whispers to the unborn, we remembered. And because of that, you are free to imagine. This is our reckoning. This is our return. This is New Africa. And still, even now, as I sit beneath the mango tree in my grandmother's village, watching children kick dust into the sunset, I realize this is how revolutions begin. Not in gunfire, in conversations, in silence finally broken by truth, in the ordinary moments when one person dares to ask, why not us? Traoré may have delivered the speech, but the words belong to all of us now. They have traveled farther than bullets, deeper than policies. They are written not just on walls, but in the air. We now breathe differently with pride, not apology. I look around and see the ripple effects. In a cafe in Kigali, students argue not about grades, but about gold reserves. In Lagos, a mother names her newborn Azadi freedom. In Cape Town, children write poems beginning with, "We are not poor." These are not coincidences. They are echoes. We used to be told our future was global code for someone else's control. Now, for the first time in my life, I hear my peers speak of building something ours. An economy that doesn't depend on exporting raw materials, but builds local industries. A diplomacy that doesn't echo someone else's press release, but speaks in our native tongues. Firm, complex, unapologetic. This is the Africa that is rising not in skyscrapers, but in self-respect. And to the skeptics, those who say this is a phase, a moment of fever, I say, it is a memory awakening. And once a continent remembers itself, there is no turning back. Traoré did not offer us a messiah. He offered us a mirror, and what we saw shocked us. We were never weak, only made to feel so. We were never voiceless, only shouted over. We were never incapable, only uninvited. But now we are inviting ourselves into policymaking, into research, into art, law, technology, education, not as consumers, but as creators. We no longer want access to rooms we didn't design. We are building new rooms, new languages, new maps. One where Africa is not a recipient of development, but a source of direction. This is not a fantasy. It's already begun. In Burkina Faso, young coders are developing encryption tools in local dialects. In Senegal, fishers are forming digital cooperatives. In Ethiopia, students are replanting forests using AI models built by their own hands. What Traoré gave us was not an answer. He gave us the audacity to ask better questions. What if our borders were bridges? What if our minerals built African machines? What if our history was not a burden, but a blueprint? And so I say, as a young African, as a witness to this moment in time, we are not waiting for the next savior. We are becoming the generation our ancestors prayed for. This is not a dream, it is a design, and we are finally holding the pen.